Good evening, Tanse, and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. The Pope's visit last month triggered the memories of many residential school survivors, and the National Survivors Hotline saw an uptick in calls. But so did a BC-based residential school survivors hotline, as their calls doubled during the papal visit. One of their counselors said their work is both hard and necessary, but it's in danger of running out of funding. Amelia Fournier has more.
The papal visit brought traumatic memories to the surface for many residential school survivors. Daisy Elliott of BC-based Indian Residential School Survivors Society, or IRSSS, said the number of calls to their 24/7 hotline doubled in July.
I first and foremost put my work and the support I have for our people first, but I'm human. We are all human.
Elliott is a team lead and part-time hotline counselor for the IRSSS. She is the daughter of a residential school survivor and has worked with survivors for over 13 years. She says the papal visit was hard on her team.
For the two survivors specifically, one dealt with a lot of incoming who were really triggered and re-traumatized by the visit. And the other one was triggered personally from not just the visit, but I think the trauma that was coming in.
Not only that, but Elliott said her team received abusive calls.
There were callers who either just played like a recording of the Bible, so there was scripture being played in the background of the phone. There was upset callers because it's not the church's fault and the church wouldn't do. So those were some of the calls that our staff received.
Staff are instructed to hang up when this happens. Despite all of this, Elliott says she feels supported by the IRSSS. The organization provides an on-staff counselor for hotline operators, and team members debrief regularly to support each other.
To be given or to be trusted with an opportunity to lead a team is something that I don't think I take lightly, but it's something I can't do on my own.
The IRSSS hotline was getting a lot of publicity at the time of the Kamloops discovery.
I think when the 215 hit, we were getting calls internationally as well. So for those who were impacted by the 60 scoop, who were taken out of the country and have no resources like there is here in BC or in Canada, they would call the lines.
She's concerned that the IRSSS hotline isn't getting shared enough anymore, and that the federal government won't extend their funding beyond next March. Minister Mark Miller says that is still undetermined.
The role that these people are playing is absolutely crucial. I think at the confluence of everything that's happened over the last year and the apology that the Pope has provided is, you've seen a lot of demand spike for people that are seeing old wounds reopening that they thought perhaps were closed. We will be there for them. But it's very hard to sort of sit down and quantify at this time.
If anyone wants to contact the IRSSS hotline, call 1-800-721-0066. Amelia Fournier, APTN National News, Montreal.
He was once considered a front-runner to become Pope. Now, Canadian Cardinal Marc Ouellette is among dozens of clergy members who stand accused of sexual assault in a class-action lawsuit. Lawyer Justin Wee's firm launched the suit.
There was one meeting where the Cardinal Ouellette were very close to her, hugged her, and started touching her back very close to her buttocks. And it was very inappropriate.
None of the allegations have been proven in court. In the lawsuit, the plaintiff maintains that incidents involving Ouellette occurred after they met in 2008 and again in 2010. Others who are part of the suit allege they were abused by priests decades ago. Gaëtan Béjon says he was only a young teen.
I was 13 when I was abused by a priest. It went on for 3 years, he says.
Béjon says he later learned that 3 of his brothers had been assaulted by the same priest. We want to hear what you think about some of the stories you've seen so far tonight. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca or leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. On the West Coast, Hastings Tent City residents and members of the Stop the Sweeps Coalition were joined by Indigenous leadership on Tuesday. They were responding to the first week of violent forced evictions of Tent City residents in the downtown East Side. We get more now from our colleagues at CTV.
Whose streets are these?
At the base of what was once a notorious SRO, now slated for demolition, people living in tents along Hastings and supporters spoke out about being asked to move on.
I'm staying in a shelter and my son stays outside. I can't live like that. I can't be in a shelter while he's outside, so I stay outside with him.
Among the speakers, Melody and her son Seth.
There needs to be more places for people like us. We just want to be a family and have our own place together.
They've been pushed out of Strathcona Park. They've been pushed out of Oppenheimer Park. They've been pushed out of a lot of these places where they were, and that's why they're here.
It's been 4 weeks since the fire chief issued an order to remove tents and structures, citing concerns about the fire risk. In a statement, Vancouver Fire says they are working with the city's engineering department to identify key areas of concern in regards to high-risk areas and areas with higher amount of combustibles. Progress is slow, but we are continuing to provide safety information and assist City of Vancouver engineering staff.
Third world conditions exist down here.
The province has said right now there isn't available space to find new accommodations for everyone on short notice.
People need a place to go before they should be banished. There's no place for them to go.
CTV requested an interview with the mayor but was told he was traveling and unavailable, and no other city staff were available either.
We're at our last stand. Do you understand? We're at our last stand.
The city says its outreach team is working with BC Housing, but as for this question posed on Hastings, it seems the answers are not all there yet. Maria Weisgarber, CTV News, Vancouver.
Living in a fly-in community can be a challenge. It can be even more challenging when the airport your fly-in community runs out of jet fuel. That's the situation facing 4 of Nunavut's most remote communities. Resolute, Pond Inlet, Grise Fjord, and Arctic Bay all have little or no jet fuel left at the airport. A scheduled flight between Grise Fjord and Resolute had to be cancelled on Monday due to the fuel shortage. It also means that cargo will be delayed and some flights may have fewer available seats. Canadian North Airlines says they are working on a short-term fix and the scheduled fuel tankers are on the way. Health officials are now warning about the possibility of human-to-pet transmission of monkeypox. A possible case in Paris has sparked concern, with a pet dog reportedly showing symptoms after sleeping with its owners. Officials are now advising those affected with the virus to steer clear of their pets as much as possible. All right, time for a short break. Still ahead, a Mi'kmaq land-based learning camp is combining science and nature. Welcome back. Roostertown is not a community you will find on any modern maps, but between 1901 and the late 1950s, it was a tight-knit community of Métis families in Manitoba that banded together in the face of dispossession by the government and non-Indigenous settlers. It had sprouted up on the outskirts of Winnipeg, now home to a school, library, and shopping mall. APTN News social media editor Savannah Kelly has been looking back on Roostertown's significance and recently wrote a story about it, and she joins us now. Savannah, nice to see you. Thanks for coming in and taking a few minutes out of your day.
Thanks for having me on the show, Daryl.
So for our viewers who have not heard of Roostertown before, can you explain a bit about the community and how it all came to be?
Absolutely. So Roostertown, which was also known as Packentown, was what's known as an urban, like, Métis fringe community, or just a fringe community. So it was actually only one of 26 such communities that existed in Manitoba around that kind of similar time frame. So in 1901, it was formed kind of on the outskirts of Winnipeg, and what led to its original formation kind of goes back to the Manitoba Act of 1870. So Manitoba Act of 1870 promised 1.4 million acres of land to Métis living in Manitoba. As the influx of settlers coming in and Manitoba joining Confederation, it was a way to ensure that Métis could continue to have their land, communities, and way of life. But unfortunately, that's not really how it played out. So there were long delays in implementing these lands, and it kind of led to this thing. Okay, so the story kind of goes back. I used this book that used a lot of research on Roostertown, and they referred to it as a form of institutionalized neglect. So sometimes these delays in implementing these land acknowledgements, or promises, I should say, would span decades. So in the meantime, like, Métis were basically dispossessed from their lands. When they were granted these lands, they were often scattered. So in the meantime, as these decades passed, non-Métis settlers came in, they got mostly these prime parcels of land, while Métis were kind of scattered to the four winds, so it made it very difficult for these communities to stay together. So Roostertown kind of sprouted up as an answer to that. So these Métis families and communities that were kind of pushed out of their previous ways of life were able to kind of gather together and have a new community kind of on the fringes of urban settlement, so they could still participate in the urban economy after being pushed out of their previous ways of life.
And now, Roostertown existed for about 60 years or so, right? So what are the circumstances that led to the community's dispersal?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So the community did exist for about 60 years, from 1901 to the late 1950s, and what it really boiled down to was Winnipeg got bigger. So when Roostertown originally was formed, it was really undeveloped land, so a lot of these residents were able to do subsistence farming, again, participating in the urban economy, but they were cut off from city amenities, so they didn't have plumbing, electricity, access to public transportation, and things like that. But as Winnipeg continued to grow over those decades, it became apparent that, you know, residents that were part of Winnipeg that were non-Indigenous residents were starting to look at Roostertown as a community that was kind of in the way of progress. And a lot of these houses were built on city-owned land for Roostertown residents, although they did buy the land that their houses were on when they could afford to do so. But it led newspaper articles in the city itself to kind of refer to them as squatters. So a lot of the articles that you would see in the Winnipeg Tribune and similar papers that existed at the time during like the 40s and into the late 1950s started kind of referring to Roostertown and covering their community in this negative light, referring to them as living in squalor and things like that. And that kind of went with the sort of racist prevailing attitudes at the time, where, you know, families in Winnipeg didn't want their kids playing with kids from Roostertown because they could catch diseases and things like that, which is so far from the truth. I was able to speak with a man named Daryl Says, whose father and grandfather both lived in Roostertown. His father was born and raised there, and he was like, you know, these negative perceptions that kind of persisted in newspapers at the time were so far from the truth. And also, they weren't written in context of Métis dispossession from their lands. So it's easy for someone who's living in Winnipeg with access to those modern amenities to look at this community and kind of snub their nose to it and look at the negatives, when really it didn't acknowledge that context of it. These people formed this community in the face of dispossession from their original ways of being. So those kind of perceptions, plus Winnipeg expanding, led to the community ending up being forcefully removed in 1959.
So how is the community being remembered now, Savannah?
That's interesting as well, because when the community was first dispersed, it kind of went underground. There wasn't acknowledgement. So even my mom, she's Métis. She grew up in the Grant Park area, attended Grant Park High School, which exists on the land where Roostertown used to be. And so that would have been in the 70s, and she had never heard of it. 15 years, 20 years after the fact, had no idea of this community's previous existence. But now in the last few years, there's been more of a push to acknowledge the community and the residents, because, like a lot of darker chapters for Indigenous people in now the history of Canada, this isn't ancient history. This exists still in the living memory of Métis people in Manitoba and Winnipeg today. So it's been interesting to see in the last 5 years or so, there's been a lot more acknowledgement. So a couple things that spring to mind would be, in 2019, there were a couple of art installations in the city by an artist named Ian August called Roostertown Kettle, and I believe the other one's called Fetching Water. And they're installations that kind of show and acknowledge Roostertown and what life was like for residents without running water at the time. So the Fetching Water, the Roostertown Kettle, I should say, art installation is a giant kettle in the city that is the size that would show how much water those residents needed to haul every single day, 250 residents. So it's this massive kettle and kind of a testament to the resilience of that community. And in addition, so there's a library in the city, the Bill and Helen Norrie Library, which is also built on the ground where Roostertown used to stand, and they've done a good job of reaching out to residents, like generational residents and people from Roostertown, to kind of do consultations on what they can do to acknowledge that the community did stand there. So you can see on the outside of the library, there's metal engravings showing, things related to life in Roostertown, like boiling water, like a kettle on the stove, a mother holding her daughter's hand, which was based on a real photo that was taken in Roostertown. If you go inside, they've got books on Roostertown and artifacts as well. And I know that there's also consultations with the Pan Am Pool for possibly renaming it to honor that they're also on the land of Roostertown. So it's really nice to see that in the last few years, there's this real push to acknowledge the community and make sure that residents know, because it's kind of been, it's been so long that it's good that they're finally kind of getting that acknowledgement.
All right, well, thanks for that, Savannah. You can read much more about Roostertown on our website, aptnnews.ca. Savannah, thanks for coming in. Always a pleasure chatting.
Thanks, Daryl.
All right, it's time for one final break, but when we come back, the 8th Alberta Indigenous Games are currently underway in Edmonton.
I was so fortunate that there was so many athletes that could, join us, especially for AIG, and I'm honored to be competing in these games.
Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Winnipeg was hit with some severe rain a couple days ago, and Scott Christensen was able to capture this photo of the gathering clouds just before the rain began to fall. This was the view in northwestern Winnipeg. Thanks for that, Scott. If you have a great photo and would like to share it with us, send that photo to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, rain in 22 in Halifax and 24 in rain in Charlottetown. 27 in Happy Valley Goose Bay and 26 in Cartwright. 24 degrees in Montreal and 19 in Quebec City. 29 and some showers in Toronto and 28 in North Bay. 28 and some showers in Timmins and 26 in Sioux Lookout. Clear and 18 in Churchill and 26 in Puckawagan. 23 and some showers in Barons River and 20 in showers in Winnipeg. 27 in Estevan and 30 in Saskatoon. 27 and sun in Buffalo Narrows and 28 in sun in Uranium City. Moving west to 30 in sun in Fort Chipewyan and 31 in Peace River. 30 degrees in Edmonton and 30 in Calgary. 28 degrees in Vancouver and 31 in Bella Coola. 22 in Sandspit and 23 in Dease Lake. 18 degrees in Dawson and 15 in Rock River. 23 in Clear in Norman Wells and 27 in Fort Simpson. 20 in Clear in Colville Lake and 18 in Fort McPherson. 16 in Cambridge Bay and 12 in Chesterfield. 7 degrees in Arctic Bay and 10 degrees in Igloolik. On Monday, we introduced you to Ikiluwak Avalak, the wrestler from Nunavut who just won the territory's first ever Canada Games gold medal. Now Iki is back in his hometown of Cambridge Bay, and the town rolled out the red carpet to celebrate their champion. There are 1,400 residents of Cambridge Bay, Nunavut, and it is estimated that around 500 of them showed up to give a warm Nunavut welcome. Avalak and some of his teammates got the full Nunavut parade treatment from the airport to the community hall. In addition to being Nunavut's first Canada Games gold, it is also Nunavut's first medal in a Summer Games and the territory's second medal ever at a Canada Games. Once in the community hall, it was time to get all the praise in person that he has been feeling from home. The 8th Alberta Indigenous Games wrap up in Edmonton on Thursday. Over 3,000 young athletes from across the province are competing in 15 events. And APTN's Chris Stewart visited the athletics competition.
3 laps to go!
A hot sun didn't stop these young competitors from giving everything they had to take home a medal. Sports included basketball, lacrosse, soccer, archery, ball hockey, and more. Today saw the second day of competition for athletics, including the relay running and high jumping. Track director Robin Webster says that she's impressed by the variety of athletes competing here.
Some of them, it's their first time doing track and field. Some of them have been doing track and field before in their schools or in their communities a little bit. So we're seeing quite a variety. A lot of them are doing other sports as a part of the games as well. We had a lot doubling with canoe kayak and golf and archery yesterday. So they're really well-rounded athletes.
James Gladue is 12 and took home several medals. He was a standout in today's competition.
I was so fortunate that there was so many athletes that could join us, especially for AIG, and I'm honored to be competing in these games, and it's a lot of fun, and like we all do different activities, and the sportsmanship's insane.
Thomas Okinen also took home several medals. He says the games offer a way to keep youth from straying to dangerous temptations.
I feel like it's important because the AIG helps kids stay out of drugs and all that. It gives them an opportunity to find something they love doing.
The closing ceremonies take place Thursday at 6 p.m. in Rundle Park. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Well, a big congratulations to all of those winners and all those competing. All right, that's all we have for you tonight on APTN National News. As always, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca, for more Indigenous news. I'm Daryl Stranger. For all of us here, thank you for joining us. Miigwech, and have yourselves a great night.